Well, good morning. It's Brian Innes here with the Canola Council of Canada. I'll be shepherding our webinar this morning and call on China and COVID-19. I want to welcome everyone who's joining from across the country this morning. We realize it's a busy season on the farm and throughout agriculture. There's a lot of optimism and there's also a lot of uncertainty as we look at the 2020 growing season. We know farmers are eager to complete their 2019 harvest, and everyone's preparing for the 2020 growing season. I'd like to start just by introducing the panelists that we'll have today to talk about China and COVID-19. We have Jim Everson, who's the president of the Canola Council, and we also have Rick White, who's the president and the chief executive officer of the Canadian Canola Growers Association. This is the latest in a series of open calls that the Canola Council and the Canola Growers Association are hosting with producers and industry to share the latest on our market access with China. It's a great opportunity for us to connect with you who support our work, and we welcome the opportunity to provide an update and to respond to the questions that you've submitted online or can submit during the course of this call. Media who are on the call can consider all comments on the record. For today's call, all of the phone lines are muted. However, we do welcome your questions through the web application where you can put them in the question box. We'll review them as we go and be able to ask those questions to our panelists throughout the call. We have received some questions and we will answer those as we go through the call today. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you can email codyp@thinkshiftinc.com. That's codyp@thinkshiftinc.com. Following the webinar, we'll post it on the Canola Council website and we'll provide an email to all those who've registered where you can find that link and you can find the recorded webinar. Any information that will be updated over time will continue to be posted on our canolacouncil.org website, as well as the Canola Growers Association website, ccga.ca. At this point, I'll pass it over to Jim Everson, who will provide an update on our market access conditions with China.
So thank you very much, Brian, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining our call this morning. As you know, China blocked the shipments of canola seed to China in March 2019, disallowing a couple of our major exporters of canola seed, Viterra and Richardson, from exporting. And we've been committed to holding these calls with growers to ensure that they're aware of the latest developments because of the importance and size of the Chinese market. And industry and federal government have been working to restore full trade and predictable trade with China. And as part of that, a number of technical calls and meetings have been held between Government of Canada officials and those in China. And the latest of those was on March 30th, when Canadian and Chinese officials discussed the matter. China at that time informed Canada that the current trade in canola seed can continue at this time, but the dockage levels would need to be less than 1% in all future shipments as of effective April 1st. So Canada has been shipping about 30% of what we would normally have been exporting in the way of canola seed to China over recent months. Those shipments, for the most part, have been at low dockage levels, so that level of trade should be able to continue under these circumstances with China. Canola shipments to China remain blocked as the licenses of those two larger exporters continue to be suspended. And our priority is certainly to restore full trade and have all Canadian exporters included in that trade. And we will keep working on this and this file until that's restored, until full trade is restored. Oil and meal exports to China are continuing. So that's the current status as of April 1st. And moving ahead, I want to just remind everybody that we're very confident of the quality of Canadian canola, and we need a predictable science-based trade environment, which is a goal that we're working to with all Canadian exporters included. The Canola Council, working with the Canadian Canola Growers Association, will continue to work on focusing Ottawa's attention to support these priorities and resume canola exports. We're in touch with the Government of Canada officials regularly, like almost daily, and with the export companies on an ongoing basis working on this issue. With the blockage, China continues, Canadian exporters are being successful in moving canola to other markets. On a year-to-date basis, canola exports are up to Bangladesh, the United Arab Emirates, Europe, Pakistan, and other markets, and our exports to valued traditional markets, Japan, Mexico, and the United States, remain strong as well. We are also continuing our outreach internationally and to develop contacts and promote canola in new markets. These activities are affected by COVID-19 mitigation efforts as a result of the lack of ability to travel and so on, but we continue this work. In December, Canola Council staff were in Pakistan meeting with industry and government officials. We have been hosting seminars directed to the feed industry, providing information on canola meal and animal feed rations, and we've been updating our promotional and technical information materials and distributing them to target markets. We are still also working with and urging the federal government to establish a stronger presence and more regular contact with regulators and policymakers, particularly in key Asian markets. Diversification of our markets means creating the infrastructure to communicate on a technical and a policy level on a regular basis with those countries, understand what their positions are and the directions they're moving. And so we're urging our government to provide additional resources to be able to do that. In the domestic market, we continue to advocate with the federal and provincial governments for an improved business environment for biofuels production, which would increase canola utilization and also spur more investment in value-added processing in Canada. So I wanted to turn it over to Rick White now at the Canadian Canola Growers Association to provide his perspective on China and also to detail in more efforts our work on biofuels.
Thank you, Jim, and good morning, everyone. I'd just like to reiterate that when the issue of China blocking canola seed occurred over a year ago now, the government and industry set up the Canola Working Group. Just a reminder that Canola Working Group continues to work to this day. Jim is the co-chair, the industry co-chair of the Canola Working Group, and producer representation from CCGA includes Bernie McLean, our chair of the board of directors, and Mike Amateur, the vice chair, and myself, and we have regular calls. On the agenda, typically for that working group is an item that we call producer support, and that's where we're quite active in giving direct feedback to the government on the situation. A regular agenda item is also biofuels, and Jim had mentioned that briefly. I'm going to concentrate just for a moment on what we are doing on the domestic market diversification front for biofuels and trying to increase the use of biofuels in Canada overall. We are pushing to increase the national renewable fuel standard to 5% of renewable content in diesel nationally. That is still under discussion, but in the meantime, we are continuing to do work more domestically and provincially. Just a quick update, Quebec, the province of Quebec is currently consulting on moving to a 4% renewable fuel standard in the province of Quebec, which is very good news. They're in a consultation mode right now, and we are providing direct input to that. And just to give you a sense of where they're going or thinking right now in their consultations, they're proposing a 1% renewable content for diesel in 2021 and moving to 4% by 2027. Just to give you an example of what that means, a 4% mandate in Quebec could be as much as 455,000 tons of canola, but that's assuming that there's no other feedstocks available to fill that mandate, which is pretty unreasonable. On the lower side of the scale, it could be as much as 180 to 200,000 tons of canola seed. That's if canola is at its typical 40% market share of the feedstock. So there is some opportunity coming there, but it's going to be a while. It's going to take a number of years for that to be implemented. But we are still working not only provincially, but nationally to get this in place as a domestic market development and diversification initiative to increase the demand for canola here in Canada. Another longstanding agenda item of the canola working group is business risk management. And we are continually and actively inside and outside the canola working group. We are asking for changes to business risk management programs. Our primary ask is basically agri stability. We would like to see that program changed. We've been talking about that for a long time with the government, and we continue to press on that issue. I'll note that there is an extension of the deadline to apply to July 3rd for agri stability this year. So that's one small step forward. But our real ask is we are pushing the government to return the reference margin to 85%, up from current 70%. And we want to remove the reference margin limit. Those are two asks to improve the agri stability program as quickly as the government can do it. We know that they're considering it, but again, no decisions to date from the government on that. Adjacent to that ask is we are asking the government to look at Agri-Invest and have proposed that Agri-Invest should be moved to the government contribution up to 5%, currently at 1% of allowable net sales, and with no matching. So we're asking the government to put in 5% without government matching into Agri-Invest. That is being met with, I would say, apprehension, to put it lightly, I guess. But we still continue to push that as well. There seems to be a bit of convergence on doing something through agri-recovery, still yet to be determined, but those are other discussions that we're currently having as well. And then finally, usually the advanced payments program comes up under producer support as well. And so just a reminder that the 2018 advanced payments program had an extended stay of default for the 2018 program, which would have come due the end of March. And we went to the government and were successful in getting that extension, another extension to the 2018 program with a new deadline of September 30th now. The problem is that September 30th deadline for the 2018 program also lines up with the deadline for the 2019 program. And so we'll be watching closely and monitoring that very closely into the late spring, early summer to see if something needs to be done with those deadlines. And for those of you that aren't aware on the phone, CCGA is an administrator of that advanced payments program for the federal government. And they increased the limits to $1 million last year to recognize the cash flow crunch that farmers were having. So that kind of rounds out, Jim, the producer support section that I wanted to talk about as it relates to China and some of the changes that have been going on over the past year. So I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Rick. It's Brian here. I think we'll stop for questions on anything related to China before moving into the COVID-19 section of the call. We've had a number of questions submitted before the webinar, as well as some that have come in during the webinar. We'll start off with Ross from Manitoba, who asks, is there any chance that normal trade will resume? And is there a way to get our own government to do something that will really help farmers? So I think we'll turn it over to Jim to start, and Rick, if you want to also comment on this.
So with respect to access to China, this is not a quick fix kind of circumstance. Obviously, it's been an issue for over a year in terms of the action China took against a couple of our major Canadian exporters. It's a complicated file. It's a file that's goes well beyond the issue of canola and is about the relations more generally between China and Canada for the most part. I think it's really important that producers and the industry continues to raise the issue with government, given the importance of the market and our efforts to continue to export to China. There are issues obviously currently that are preoccupying the government of Canada and lots of other governments. So it's important that we continue to raise the issue of China with our own government. But the federal government has made strong efforts to support our industry on this. It's something that requires a receptivity on China's part, in addition to approach from the Canadian government. We have a new ambassador, a relatively new ambassador in China now, and over time that relationship should improve. But it's something that really requires strong bilateral work at the highest political level, and we continue to work with our government towards
that. Rick, anything further to add?
No, I think Jim covered it well. Thank you.
Great. We'll go. We have two questions actually that are very similar from both Ron and Normand. And the questions are essentially around if Cargill is not blocked, why are we not shipping canola to China via Cargill and other exporters and concentrating other grains through Viterra and Richardson?
Well, I guess I would say it's Jim that other exporters are following their business strategies in terms of exporting to China. There, as I say, has been in recent months approximately 30% of the levels that we were used to previously in shipping to China. So other Canadian exporters are accessing the Chinese market for canola seed, and at the same time working through the Canola Council on diversification of markets, and engaging new markets.
We have another question in a similar vein from Lee. Lee asks, I believe you said Canada's shipping about 30% of normal canola exports to China at low dockage. Is that correct? And if Viterra and Richardson can get down to less than 1%, does that mean that shipments could resume?
So the challenge, as I understand it, with those companies is that their permits were suspended in March. So it is not in March 2019. So it's not a question simply of meeting these new terms that China has dictated for canola seed effective immediately. They also, those two companies need to work with the government of Canada and Chinese officials on resecuring their licenses to ship to China.
And we're almost coming to the end of our China questions before we move on to COVID-19. We have one last question submitted here from Lee, who asks, you mentioned several new market opportunities for Canadian canola. With all that considered, how much of the 2019 or 20 crop still needs a home? And do these new markets make up for the amount that that has been lost with China?
Lee, I don't have all of those statistics right at my fingertips. We are encouraged that exporters are being able to access new markets and divert or diversify seed sales to other markets. I don't think I can provide a complete up-to-date on exactly how much it's been that would have normally gone to China has gone to other markets.
Thanks, Jim. I believe you were saying earlier in the call that our exports to Europe, to Pakistan, to the UAE, as well as other markets have increased over the course of the crop year.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, at this point, we're having no further questions on China at the moment. We'll move to the COVID-19 portion of the agenda. If you do have further questions that come up on China or COVID-19, continue to submit them on the online platform and we'll address them at the end. Jim, over to you for COVID-19.
Okay, so thank you very much. So it's never been so important for global supply chains to be able to feed people and animals. And we're working to assure that we can continue to produce and deliver high quality canola products and deliver them to our customers. The Canola Council, again, working closely with the Canadian Canola Growers Association, has been participating in regular coordination calls. We have these calls 3 times a week with Agriculture Canada and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And we've also been coordinating with Cereals Canada and Pulse Canada and other national grains and oilseeds organizations on priorities for the sector during these, really unprecedented times. We have a lot in common in terms of our objectives as grains and oilseeds industry. So we are working with other national associations on that front. We've really focused on ensuring that farmers have access to inputs and resources to get the 2020 crop in the ground. We have been advocating that the value chain be included as an essential service when it comes to COVID restrictions, and governments over the past period of time, we've been advocating that. And governments, both federal and provincial, have really taken action to do so. By and large, when it comes to farm inputs and equipment parts, rail, truck, and marine infrastructure, and the grain handling and processing network, the industry appears to be handling this crisis very well. We are eager, certainly, to hear any concerns of farmers or industry have. But in general, reports from the value chain are good, and conditions, at least as far as they relate to the COVID restrictions, appear good as seeding gets going in earnest. There are a couple of areas of concern that we are currently working on. One of them deals with the research community. Agriculture Canada is reviewing its ability to continue its research projects, given the public health restrictions in place. And it's scaling its research operations back to critical services only. So the Canola Council is advocating for a timely start to the 2020 field trials that Agriculture Canada normally does, as long as they can be executed, and we think they in many cases can be, in a manner that's safe for all those that are involved from a COVID point of view. Field trials from Agriculture Canada are a key component of the research work the Canola Council coordinates on behalf of the industry, including research into blackleg and sclerotinia and other yield-robbing diseases and so on. And where possible, we hope this research can continue over the coming growing season. There may be circumstances with particular projects where it's unfeasible without jeopardizing workers' health and safety to carry on the research work, but we're ready, very much ready to work with Agriculture Canada to help find solutions and do this on a case-by-case, project-by-project basis. So we're continuing to work with Agriculture Canada's Science and Technology Division on that front. In terms of the Canola Council's agronomic services, these services are really important from our point of view for growers and commercial agronomy. It's a top priority for the Canola Council. We will not change this commitment to support producers, but our approaches and our programs will change. We're committed to working with provincial growers associations, the commissions in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta to find solutions to support growers while meeting the standards that are required by those provinces' public health officials. Some of the changes will require field events such as the paloozas that we have partnered with provincial grower associations to deliver will change. So the paloozas are canceled this year. However, we're really focused on providing timely and relevant information through a wide variety of communications tools. This includes our Canola Watch e-newsletter, video and podcasts, Canola Encyclopedia website, social media, and radio spots. Between us and the provincial commissions, we're very much dedicated to supporting producers agronomically through the 2020 crop, despite and in keeping with and adapting to the standards that have been applied to support mitigation of COVID. So we'll continue to support producers that way. So Rick White and the CCGA have also been, working very hard on this issue and being involved in the discussions with Agriculture Canada. And so I want to turn it over to Rick and talk about what CCGA is doing to support producers at this time.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, COVID-19, daily calls are happening with the entire agriculture sector and the team at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and we're all on those calls every day. And the purpose is to bring COVID-19 related issues facing agriculture and food production to the senior management officials at AAFC. and try to find solutions or responses to those challenges. It's somewhat of a SWAT team approach, I would call it, with very senior officials at Ag Canada, including the Minister of Agriculture. Our main priority since day one has been the continuous operation of supply chains for farmers, both inbound for the provision of inputs to get seeding underway and maintained through the growing season, and of course the outbound supply chains, domestic, national, and international, and that's whether it's trucks or trains. We're keeping a very close eye on that too. As co-chair of the Crop Logistics Working Group, we have a working group that focuses solely on grain movement, and we are very closely monitoring the situation through that working group to make sure that grain continues to keep moving and remains fluid. And things are pretty good right now at the current time, but that can change at any time as well. One issue that has taken up considerable time on these meetings is the issue of temporary foreign workers that are needed by many in the ag industry that rely on temporary foreign workers. And the issue there is the restrictions on people coming into Canada and complying with the COVID-19 restrictions and self-isolation issues there. Processing plants, greenhouses, vegetable producers, grains and oilseed farms rely on temporary foreign workers. I think they've kind of got that sorted out now, but there are still a lot of details and issues that pop up, and it's taken a lot of time on these daily COVID-19 calls. Another issue that is emerging is the personal protection equipment, PPE availability for producers. We've heard a lot from a lot of producers about the lack of equipment, PPE equipment for farmers to conduct your operations, such as grain handling and seed treating and spraying related activities. And so CCGA has brought this issue directly to the Ag Canada team, and we're still waiting a response on next steps, but they are well aware of the issue. But we'll try to get that sorted out with the government to ensure farmers have the equipment that they need to do their job on farm during the COVID-19 crisis here. And of course, cash flow is a big concern for many farmers at this time of year, COVID related or not, it seems. And so we, CCGA has had recent discussions with Government of Canada, or the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, including the Minister directly, on getting some changes to the APP program to help support and get these advances through our system faster. And I can elaborate that later on if need be, but we have had some movement there to help us, given that we have vacated our office and moved everyone remotely in the office, and that includes all staff in the administration of the Advanced Payments Program. So we're all working remotely, and that has caused some issues, including some of the new rules that Canada put on us. So we will continue to monitor the supply chains issue in terms of seed and fertilizer, et cetera. Fuel deliveries is also a key one. And you know, as I think through this, I think there could be some disruptions possibly in feed grain supply chains, because we are starting to see disruptions in the large animal markets due to closures of packing plants, for example, meat, beef, I should say, pork. Some of these things may start to impact some of the feed grain supply chains and demand for feed grains. But again, that's just a heads up thing. It's just my thought on that. Just wanted to raise it that we should all be thinking about that, especially as farmers, because I know most of you probably grow some kind of cereals and feed grains in your rotations. So I think that's what I wanted to cover, Jim, on COVID-19. So I'll turn it back to you, Brian.
Thanks a lot, Rick. So we've had a number of questions come in over the course of the call. We hope to get to as many of them as possible. There's been a number of questions around business risk management as well as cash advance. We'll start with a question that we had from Lyle in Manitoba, but also Ron in Manitoba has asked something very similar around processing delays for cash advance. The question is related to the delays and whether these delays are likely to continue, and what farmers should expect as cash advance is now administered from employees in their homes.
Great question. And yes, I was expecting that. We are behind in the administration of the advances. We're definitely behind in our regular turnaround time of receiving the application and getting it out the door. Typically, we're running 3 to 5 business days, but that is out the window at the present moment because of the bad luck of timing for COVID-19. I made the decision to get all our staff out of the office in mid-March. Because April 1 was coming, that's the launch of the new 2020 program, which is usually our busiest weeks or month of the year. And to ensure business continuity, the only way I could do that was to get everybody out and working remotely from home, and we lost a lot of efficiency. Now, that would have been fine, except in addition to that, Ag Canada implemented new rules on assessing a more stringent process to determine credit worthiness for the 2020 program starting April 1. So that added a lot more work to an already reduced functionality of our business continuity. Given about a week into that, I could see that we're going backwards quickly. We're getting behind further and further. I brought it up directly with the minister that we needed to relax those new, more stringent rules that they imposed on April 1 and to back those off. After a week of negotiating with the bureaucrats, we did get some relief there, and we did get some relaxation, not total relaxation of the new rules, but considerable relaxation, which now allows us to get those advances done quicker. Now, we do have a big backlog and we're chewing through it right now, but we are starting to see the backlog starting to move the correct way. Our curve is flattening in terms of time to get those advances out, but we are still several weeks behind. And we have communicated directly with farmers through email and on our website to please understand that we are doing the best that we can with the capacity that we've got and under the new rules that we find ourselves. So it is going in the right direction, Brian. Those advances are going out the door quicker now because of the relaxation of some of those rules. But it's going to take some time to really wrestle this thing to the ground. So that's it's on the right track, but again, it's going to take us some time.
Thanks, Rick. Now we've got a question around canola meal movement into the U.S. by rail from Jason in Alberta. Has the closing of the Canada-U.S. border affected the movement of canola meal by rail into the U.S.? And I think this is also in the spirit of a similar question from Alan in Manitoba, who asks about demand for canola products as a result of COVID-19. And will the closure of borders as a result of COVID-19 make buyers more anxious to secure supplies of seed, oil, and meal? So a specific question on meal into the U.S., but also related, how is it COVID affecting the demand for seed, oil, and meal? So we'll turn that over to Jim.
Well, thanks for the question. On the transportation issue, I'm not aware at all of any disruptions of transportation of canola meal into the United States. For the most part, in terms of the trans-border traffic going back and forth from Canada to the United States and the provision of farm inputs to Canada and so on, all reports are that they are going well. So I don't have any knowledge of a challenge getting canola meal into the United States. I think there is certainly questions about the global economy and where it is going and the impact it can have on all kinds of products and especially animal feed and food issues. So I don't have a crystal ball on that front. I think that we're facing some very uncertain times globally. We are an essential service in Canada, so governments here certainly recognize the importance of continuing the food and feed chains. And around the world, people need access to food, and in some cases, there may be some restrictions on food in some places. So I think from a grains and oilseeds point of view, there should be demand for products generally. I note that the government of Canada, with a number of other countries, some 22 or 23 other countries, worked through the WTO to provide a statement about the importance in the future of measures taken on COVID not adversely affecting trade in agriculture and agri-food products, which would ultimately have negative effects on food security, nutrition, and the health of people living in the countries that have signed on to this document. So, I think there's always a difference between these kinds of statements and what actually happens. But Canada has been really involved in trying to move forward and make sure that, in the case of food and global trade in food and animal products, that animal feed products, that protectionism doesn't become a factor. So I hope that partly addresses the question, Brian.
It does. We've had a number of questions come in around changes to demand as a result of COVID in different markets in the U.S. and China. So, Jim, I know you've mentioned it's hard to have a crystal ball, but I'll try to ask the questions that have been raised by those on the phone, including Kent, Ward. We also have a question from Wayne as well in Saskatchewan. I'll ask them similarly here and give you an opportunity to provide some context, Jim. The questions are around what the breakdown of canola use in China is, household versus commercial food processors. That has certainly been in the news around the impact of people eating out less on French fry demand, which is what Ward is asking about in the United States, and how that could potentially negatively impact oil demand for canola in the U.S. market, not having French fries served as often. And then a further question from Kent, who asked, how much demand are you anticipating with countries wanting to replenish stocks after COVID-19 is over? So, Jim, some general questions there around how demand is changing as a result of COVID in the U.S. and China, and any comment that you can provide for information.
I think it's an area where we're very much turning attention with everybody. I believe that as COVID has become an issue, our immediate focus, as we pointed out earlier in the call, was about ensuring that the Canadian value chain could continue to produce canola and process it and export it. And a lot of our efforts initially have gone into that. And at this time, we're really turning our attention to those issues that are being raised around what the global financial situation looks like and the impact it may have on the export of our products. We've seen media around difference in the utilization of oil, for example, canola oil in the U.S. market, where obviously areas that the food service industry, from a point of view of restaurants and so on, has been affected by the closure of those and the COVID mitigation tactics. But on the other hand, the food processing side has increased, and so some of the slack has been taken up by that, and there's strong demand for our products in other sectors. So I think it's something that the whole industry is really turning a lot of attention to. And as I said earlier, in terms of our promotion as well, COVID affects how we can do that without being able to travel, do the kind of seminars that we have normally done, or having incoming missions where we're able to meet with customers and do tours of Canadian operations and so on. So we need to find new ways of doing that, and we'll continue to promote canola around the world despite these complications.
We have one more question on the effects of COVID, and then a number of questions around BRM, which we'll go to Rick for. And I also see some questions coming in around China, which we'll come back to at the end. So right now, one more question on COVID for Jim. With respect to, this is from Ron in Manitoba. So regarding COVID-19, are there any parallels to the meat processing industry in the grain logistics system? Are there any points along the shipment of grain where there are significant amounts of workers working in close proximity to each other, which could be a risk similar to what the meat processing industry has experienced?
Well, certainly in the grain handling sector, in terms of inland elevators and terminals and canola processing plants, there are numerous workers working in particular facilities. To my knowledge, there are no significant issues like the ones that are currently a challenge in the meat industry in the grain handling and grain canola processing sector. And so while I think there are in the processing sector and perhaps in marine terminals and so on, places where we need to be very vigilant about keeping the mitigation measures in place and following public health officials' advice. To my knowledge, there are no significant issues at this time.
Well, now we'll turn to BRM, and some of these questions cross over between the China commentary as well as the COVID commentary. We'll turn to Rick for these questions. The first one is from Ron in Manitoba. Does government give, regarding business risk management, does government give farm groups grief over current Agri-Invest account balances when lobbying for increases to BRM programming?
Thank you for the question, Ron. I wouldn't say they give us grief, but they do, and I know that it does come up periodically that they have noted that there is still about at least $2 billion in farmers' agri-invest accounts. They can see that. I understand that it probably throws a little cold water on our ask when we start talking about agri-invest because of that $2 billion sitting in an account. Do they give us grief? No, but they do take note of it. So I think that could be an issue that's holding us back somewhat.
An additional question around cash advance. Is there any push to renew an expanded interest-free cash advance for canola? If not, why not? This is from Mike. Most
of the requests, and we do about 11,000 advances a year, so we talk to farmers daily, constantly, and most of the comments directly from the users of the program are not about the interest-free part. I know there was an increase, and understand the increase up to 500,000 interest-free got a lot of farmers' attention, but really going back to the 100,000 interest-free under the current 2020 program has not generated a lot of questions about the interest-free component, mostly because the interest rate is super low now, and our interest rate at CCGA on advances over the $100,000 is CIBC prime minus 0.75%. It is subprime even on the interest-bearing portion of the advance. So we all know where the interest rate is at. So it's very, very low interest charges right now, and we're not hearing much from farmers about pushing for more interest-free, just because I hate to say it, it's not free, but it's almost free even on the interest-bearing, given the low rates that we're experiencing right now.
Thanks, Rick. We have another question here from Lyle. I know you spoke earlier about the challenge in getting advances out as quickly as possible. Lyle is asking, what is the expected time for processing advances now?
I cannot give a firm answer on that, and the reason is the right answer is it depends. It depends if the farmer has a good track record with us, and it depends if they are looking for an advance in excess of 400,000, and it depends on the individual farmer's credit score and their PPASA registrations that they have, which we have to look at now. So on on ones that are over 400,000, those are the ones that we have to stick to the more stringent process to determine credit worthiness. Those automatically result in assessment of credit scores and a PPSA registration search for that farmer, and that takes a long time. And however, a farmer coming in for only 100,000 interest free, and they've been a customer for the last 5 years and have no default records or track record, those can go through very quickly within a week or two. But these other more difficult ones that take a lot more work will take weeks. But again, it depends on which advance and which farmer and the circumstances for each one. So it's hard to give a definitive answer to the question.
Thanks, Rick. One last question related to business risk management before we move back to questions on China. We'll hope to wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so, and we'll try to get as many questions answered as we can in that time. So, Rick, the question is around the Canola Growers Association's ask to increase Agri invest from 1% to 5%. This is from Ron in Manitoba. And this is increasing from 1% to 5% without matching farmer dollars. Would the cap of $10,000 per producer be removed? Currently, the first limit to Agri invest dollars is the $10,000 cap for our farm.
Yeah, the cap would go up proportionately, so that $10,000 at 1% would be increased to $50,000 at the 5%. So it would be a proportionate increase of the cap around it is the concept we've been pushing.
Now we'll go back to the topic of China, where we've got a few questions that have come in. There's, in similar vein to previous questions, the question from Mike is, has the Canola Council or the Canola Growers Association ever approached the grain companies to develop a coordinated export program to China, which would work around the trade limitations placed on Viterra and Richardson? Jim, would you like to address that one?
I would say that all of the companies are working very closely through the value chain in the Canola Council with the growers and with the other elements of the value chain to provide a united approach to working to restore the market with China and to work with our government.
Another question from Rick. In terms of export diversification, how many countries does Canada export canola to, and where in the world has capability to crush canola?
Well, it's a good question, and we export canola seed to over 50 markets around the world. The major markets, of course, are in the United States, China, Japan, and Mexico, and then a range of other markets that are significant markets also. Now, when we look around the world, it is an important consideration. Canola needs to be processed, and so one of the challenges in finding new markets is ensuring that you have the processing capacity in that market to be able to sell canola seed. And those markets that don't have processing capacity of their own are clients for canola oil sales. So when we do look around the world, the United Arab Emirates has crushing capacity. Pakistan has growing crushing capacity. It's one of the factors with trade to China is that the largest importer and processor of oilseeds in the world is China, and they have crushing capacity, and so that creates a demand for canola and other oilseeds to that market. So I would say primarily we're focused on new markets in Asia, where there is also growth in terms of consumer disposable income and a larger middle class and changing diets that favor canola products. So the key markets that I say there that we are focused on are the United Arab Emirates, Pakistan, also Bangladesh. We're also, from a feed point of view and canola meal point of view, looking at the markets like Thailand, and there's some interest there.
I think that concludes the questions we have on China. We have one or two left around COVID. The question is from Lee. Do you think that there is room or opportunity for Agriculture Canada to reconsider and start regular research programs for 2020? Lee references other grain commodity groups not being particularly optimistic. Jim or Rick, would you like to comment on that?
I think what we're trying to discuss, I think the answer is yes, first of all, but you know, we need to recognize the strain that governments are under with respect to their own human resources, and those resources, you know, being restricted by the COVID restrictions that are in place. So, as I said earlier in the call, our approach, Lee, is to look at, you know, can we look what are the priorities for research, the higher priorities, and in those particular projects, can they be done in a way that is safe for those people who are involved in executing them, and how can we work to make sure that that's the case, so that research should go ahead. So that's the discussion we're having with agriculture right now. You know, to the discussion Rick was having earlier about advanced payments and so on, and then, you know, it's important, I think, to keep in mind that the government of Canada is dealing with a very, very significant public health challenge, and a lot of the officials that we work with on a regular basis are kind of reassigned to working on the mitigation or on the COVID file because of how critical a national importance that is. And so, you know, we recognize that there are issues with managing all of the issues that are on the federal government's plate, and research in agriculture is one of them. But we feel that if we can focus on the priorities and look at how we can adapt to the restrictions that are in place because of COVID, then we can continue the most important research going forward.
So one last question before we wrap up. It's more a question of clarification for you, Rick, around Agri-Invest. What would be the advantage of raising the Agri-Invest limit and losing the matching portion?
No, we are asking to raise the limit and it not have to be matched by the farmer, so that Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada would put in 5% of the farmer's allowable net sales into the Agri-Invest account with no matching requirements by the farmer.
Thanks for that clarification, Rick. Now we'll move to any final remarks that Jim or Rick would like to make before we conclude. Back to you, Jim.
I think, Brian, I'd say thank you for everybody for participating. I hope these calls are helpful. And but secondly, we continue to work on behalf of the industry. We're really focused on making sure that the crop can go in the ground efficiently this spring, and we know everybody's getting ready for that. Where we can help on that, we certainly are trying. And when it comes to COVID, as I say, generally speaking, the reports we get from the value chain are that things are in reasonably good shape, especially relative to some other sectors that are really having difficulty with COVID mitigation. But if we've missed anything, if there's issues that come to mind or issues that come up in the near future, please let us know. And as Rick has been pointing out, we are on these calls regularly with the Government of Canada, and we will raise those issues with them and try to coordinate a solution. So thank you very much.
To you, Rick?
Sure, and it's probably just more of a reiteration of what Jim just said. Just a reminder to everyone on the call that we have ongoing and very open communications direct with the highest levels of the government, particularly the Agriculture Department officials, including the Minister and the Minister's office as well. So we have our ear to the ground, and to do that, we need the farmers on this call to give us the intel that we need on any problems that you are experiencing out there with whatever operational problems that you may be observing. And we need specific examples of that. So please know that we are constantly looking and monitoring the situation, and your input direct to us on this, we can get that to the government very, very quickly. But again, it needs to be specific examples of problems that you could be experiencing. So just a reminder, our ears are open, and we're on these calls, and your input is critical.
Well, thanks everyone for participating today. We had several hundred people register and participate, which is really positive for the Canola Council and the Canola Growers Association to be able to connect directly with farmers and industry representatives who want to hear the latest and have questions about what's going on with China market access as well as the COVID-19 situation. I'd like to remind everyone that the latest updates around China are available on the canolacouncil.org website or the ccga.ca site as well, which provides links to the council site on market access. And as Rick mentioned, there is an ongoing interest in staying in touch with farmers and industry representatives from across the country, especially on the issue of COVID and how it's affecting the agri-food supply chain. So please do reach out to us via the contact information on our website if you have questions or further comments about that. We did have an opportunity to get to most of the questions. There were several which we did not, and we will take the opportunity to connect your question with the relevant staff members at the two organizations so they can respond in more detail. Again, this recording will be available on the Canola Council website, canolacouncil.org. If you would like to listen to portions of it or share it with others. Thanks again for your participation. We look forward to staying in touch with you and working on your behalf to continue to keep market access front and center in the minds of the Canadian government and to do what is needed to help our industry operate in these very interesting times. Thank you very much. Look forward to connecting again soon.